Up to this point, I'm doing my best to cover the same content, minus the darkroom practice, that we would be learning in our normal circumstances. I'm going to do my best to continue that with our next topic, shallow depth of field. Shallow depth of field is one of the most powerful tools a photographer has to control what part of the image a viewer sees first. Shallow depth of field is where one part of the image is in focus, while the rest of the image falls out of focus. Unless you're working with a DSLR right now and not the phone camera I imagine you have, we won't really be able to shoot photos to this quite this dramatic effect, although I hope to try. I still want you to have some exposure to this concept, even though we're not doing this the traditional way with our film cameras. But as always, we're going to do our best given our limitations. So here's my introduction. Shallow depth of field is the most powerful way we can control our viewer's gaze in the image because we want to focus our brains, our eyes want to pay attention to the part that's already clear. It's what our eyes do naturally, so we're recreating that with a camera image. So what we really talk about in photography is three types of blur. Two of them are bad. Well, yeah, there's the out of focus picture where either we did that with our camera where we took a blurry picture and we can't fix that, or sometimes when we're printing in the darkroom, our enlarger's out of focus, so we can get a focus scope. It's a magnifier that lets us see whether our image is in focus or not. Then there's motion blur, which captures the movement of an object as it the lens stays open as the image moves, so we capture all of that movement in a blur on the image. And then the last one is shallow depth of field. And you may have done this accidentally with your first roll of film. It really has to do with how your camera is set. So here's an out of focus picture, right? It's all blurry. Here's an out of focus picture with some camera shake to it. So we see this, it's blurry. This happens a lot when we take low light images because our camera's trying to capture all of the light, but the lens stays open long enough that something moves and we capture this kind of blur or shake. It's another reason why we typically don't shoot photos with our shutter speed slower than 1/60th of a second. And then the last one is our motion blur. I found this image. I thought it was absurd and needed to put it in, especially this lady here cracks me up. She's just, and this guy on his phone. I don't know. But what you see here is what I believe is Darth Vader moving much more quickly than anybody else during the amount of time that the shutter was open. So we see a blur there rather than a crisp, clear image. Then sometimes in advertising, we get these images where the background is blurry and the back end of the car is blurry and the front is in focus. This is completely faked because everything would be moving at the same speed. We wouldn't get the back end of the car moving faster than the front end of the car, so we can't have part of the car blurry and the other part not. But it happens lots of times, and just another way to recognize the image. It's these streaks of color across here. It's these streaks of color that we get with a blur image. Then we have shallow depth of field, and shallow depth of field works beautifully for portraits and for still lifes. Doesn't work necessarily for landscapes because by definition, a landscape has everything in focus from wherever we are to infinity, so to the horizon. So by definition, a landscape cannot be that, but pictures outside can be. So it's kind of a square and rectangle kind of a thing. Squares are rectangle, but rectangles aren't squares, but that kind of a thing. So, but in a portrait, it's very nice because it allows you to focus on the face of your subject, and regardless of how beautiful or ugly your background is, by letting that fall out of focus, it becomes unimportant to the image. It also helps you isolate small things so that your focus can really be placed upon them as well. To compare, when you have an image that everything's in focus, you can see that here on the left, and then we call that great depth of field or deep depth of field. I prefer great because deep depth of field is harder to say. Then there's shallow depth of field, where there's this narrow band where the red car's in focus, but the yellow and green are out of focus. It's not that they disappear, they're just slightly blurry. So depth of field, it's a silly photo term, but it's one of the most searched terms in photography on Google. So if you type in depth of field pictures, you'll find millions upon millions of images and articles and videos and things like that about this. But really, what does it mean? It means if you're standing there and the distance from you, so how deep into your field, the field being the area in front of you, how deep into that field of vision is in focus. And it has everything to do with the distance the objects are from your camera. And that's a function of lenses in general. Just simply lenses work that way. So if we were going to put three objects on a table, and this is how mine are oriented. Here's James from Thomas the Tank Engine. Here's Curious George and an orange Matchbox car. And if that's my view from above and I don't move these objects, I can shoot it so that the car is in focus and the other objects fall out of focus. Because of the way I've positioned myself that they're all at eye level, they become different distances from me. I can also change that and focus on what is the back end as well, where you see the back of the room and the other objects and not the orange car so much. But the trick here is to shoot at eye level. So if I'm higher up shooting down at the objects, they're all the same distance from me. But here, this looks much better. It's much more interesting photograph because some of the objects are in focus and others are not. That's my old darkroom in the old building, if you're wondering where this picture was taken. Okay, so if we're setting cameras, it's really about our f-stops. Those are the numbers that exist on your lens, and they are the ones with decimal points, 1.8, 2.84, 5.6, 8, 16, 11 in there too. I skipped 11. On here, what you want to do is put it to the smallest F number that opens your lens the widest, so the most light comes in, and then from there, it will shorten that range of focus to the narrowest range there. If you have a camera with a built-in zoom, that number's likely 3.5 to 5.6, depending on how you have it set. But most of the time it's 1.82 or 2.2, somewhere in that range. So once that's set, we would then change your shutter speed to accommodate that, making sure that when we do it, our shutter speed doesn't fall below 60, because then we'll get the bad blurry, camera shake images in there too. So we're going to make sure we stay 60 or higher with that if we were using a film camera. So a comparison here, 2.8, f2.8 here all the way on the right, f8 all the way on the left, and you can see that those carved faces are more in focus, so are the trees and the street light in the background than on the 2.8. And it's much more subtle when you go in between that with 5.6. Okay, so what we would normally be doing is something that looks like this, which would be a darkroom photograph of an image in shallow depth of field. These are hand painted. That's something we would have been doing anyway. If you do come back for photo 2, don't worry, we will come back and do all of these things. But you can see here the San Pellegrino sparkly fizzy water bottle is in focus. The other objects in front of it and behind it are not. Love this picture of the banana. The wires from this special banana basket are nearer to us than the banana, so that is what's in focus. The banana's in focus and these wires are not. And the distance, the rest of the kitchen behind it is also out of focus. But still lives are what we're going to shoot. This is the other part of the project. There were 3 parts of what we would normally do, which would be shallow depth of field photographs, shooting still life, and then hand coloring them. Hand coloring we can't do together because I have those materials at school and you do not have them at home. The darkroom part of this with our SLR cameras, we can't do that. If you have a DSLR, you can work with this, but we're definitely going to shoot still life. So take a peek at what people have done here. Here's musical instruments. Here's the bridge of a string instrument. It's very dramatic. The shallow depth of field here, you can see this is the string instrument here, the F holes. Here's a very simple still life of pears. You can see that it's been painted. You can also do this with portraits where some objects are in focus and others fall out of focus. Objects around us, when positioned correctly, can become still life, shallow depth of field. Here, this fence gate is in focus with the area behind it and in front of it out of focus. Here's another still life. This one is very up close images of the clothespins. You can see how lovely they are. This one here in focus. These back here are out of focus. This one here is one of my favorites, where you can see this tiny teacup, but you can see the exact line right here, the exact line of where it falls in focus, and then back here, out of focus. So what we're talking about is a couple inches in focus with this, where you can see that anything before it and after it are out of focus. I've attached the next video, which I think is a really great illustration of a way to think about this when we're shooting. It's one that he describes it in a way that I think really matches the way I understand it and the way I want you all to understand it. So we're going to watch that next. There's a couple extras in there. Thanks, guys. We're going to do our best